Without a doubt, if you are thinking about divorce, one of the most important factors to consider is how it will impact your children. Now, what I'm not going to do is tell you what you should do because I can't do that. Nobody can do that. Only you, perhaps alone or perhaps with your partner, can decide if divorce is the right decision for you and your family at this time. What I am going to do is give you some things to think about and some questions to ask yourself as you work through this difficult decision. Okay, so first I need to be completely transparent. I do not have children. And so when I went through my own divorce, that was not a factor that I had to consider at all. And so I know you're probably thinking, well, then who are you to be giving any of this information and to tell me what I should be thinking about when it wasn't something that you have even dealt with? Well, where I'm coming from is my 20 years of experience in the middle school classroom. And what that means is I have had thousands of kids come through my classroom, many for multiple years, who have had a variety of different home situations. Everything from happy, healthy homes to parents that were still together, but where things weren't good, all the way through divorce that happened prior to the kid being in my class, divorce while the kid was in my class, and everything in between. And one of the things that happens with middle school is it's a point where children are becoming more aware of what's going on. They're able to articulate what it is that they're feeling, and yet they're still willing to open up to adults. And so over those years, I had so many conversations with so many kids about what they were experiencing. And I also was able to observe from, sort of that removed perspective, the impact that the various home situations had on the kids. And so a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is coming from that perspective. It's also coming from my experiences working with many, many clients over the years and their experiences with their kids. And then finally, it's coming from my own experience as a child coming from a divorced home. And again, none of this is telling you what to do. It's simply giving you some things to think about as you're working to make this decision. So first, I think it's important to recognize that not all bad, quote unquote, marriages are alike. And it's really important for you to recognize kind of what sort of marriage, what sort of environment you have before you make the decision that it makes sense to stay together for the sake of the kids. So on the most extreme is the abusive home. And what I see sometimes is that people will excuse staying for the sake of the kids if the kids aren't directly being abused. And this always breaks my heart because even if the kids are not the target of the abuse, being in that environment causes extreme distress and trauma for the children. And so if this is the situation that you find yourself in, even if the abuse is not physical, please, please get the perspective of a therapist or somebody from the domestic abuse hotline. Get the perspective of somebody from outside the relationship to help you see things with some clarity. Another type of environment is where one partner has basically checked out of the relationship. A lot of times there's infidelity involved or whatever's going on, but they're not present. They're pretty much done with it, but they're not actively seeking divorce. And then the other partner is wanting to make it work or not wanting to end it and sometimes choosing not to end it for the sake of the kids. And obviously the repercussions for the kids in that environment aren't as severe as when abuse is occurring. But don't think that just because there's not direct abuse that the kids aren't recognizing that one of their parents really isn't present. Sometimes you have an environment where both partners are sort of distant and checked out. Maybe there's like this kind of quiet content, that sort of energy going on throughout the household. And I think it can be important to recognize that there doesn't have to be fighting in order for the environment to be damaging to the kids. Now, sometimes there is fighting. Sometimes it's a very contentious atmosphere where there's lots of yelling and uncertainty. And maybe it's even kind of like an on again, off again situation where the kids don't really know what they're going to walk into from day to day. They don't really know what to expect. So there's a lot of uncertainty there for them. And then finally, you have this sort of marriage where you make good parents, you're maybe good friends, you're great housemates, but there's just no real love there anymore, no real passion there anymore. But yet you get along. There's no contempt, there's no fighting. You're both present, you're just no longer in love. And I think you can recognize that that situation for the kids is very different than one where the two parents aren't able to get along and aren't both fully present. Now, as you're making this decision, I think it's really important to challenge that notion of that parents being together is always good for the kids, and parents being apart is always bad for the kids. It's not that simple. And sometimes what it ultimately comes down to is you have to decide what is most important for you and for your family. The two parents being together, or the parents being happy and healthy, even if that means being apart. Now, if you are making the decision to stay together for the kids, are they aware of this fact? Because that is a whole lot of responsibility to put on those small shoulders. As you're thinking through what your family is going to look like, think about security, because security, that feeling of security, is one of the most primal needs for kids. And how is that need being addressed? And regardless of the family structure, they need to know that the adults in their life are there for them. They need to have a sense of what they're going to come home to each day. They need to know what to expect. When they have too much uncertainty, they begin to shut down. If you make the decision to stay together for the kids, what's the end date to this? Are you pledging to stay together until they're out of high school, out of college, forever? This is something that's important to think about, because whenever parents divorce, it impacts the kids. That's true even when they are adults. And so unless you're committing to staying in this marriage, even if you're not happy for the long haul, there's going to be some fallout. Now, it is absolutely true that the impact on the kids changes depending upon their particular life stage, as well as their temperament. And so one of the things you may want to consider is doing some research on how divorce impacts kids at different life stages, and think about how that applies to your particular children and their particular personalities and how you think they are going to be able to handle this. Consider what you're teaching your kids through your actions, because they really do learn from watching us. Are you teaching them not to give up, that you grow together, that you work together towards some end goal that's bigger than you? Or perhaps you're teaching them that it's okay to accept mistreatment, or that it's okay to become stagnant and maybe make decisions out of fear. I think sometimes one of the most powerful exercises with this is to think about, if this was your child, now an adult, in this same situation, what would you want for them? Because really, to live authentically, that's what you should be modeling for them now. Now, one of the important things to consider is the extended fallout of divorce, because divorce is going to impact so much more than just which house they're at on which weekend. It could potentially impact their relationship with their grandparents. It may impact the family's finances and what sort of activities the kids are able to do. Maybe it changes the school that they go to. So think about all of those additional changes that may happen, because it's important to weigh those too. And then finally, think about, are your own childhood experiences coming into play here? Maybe your parents were divorced and you swore you would never, ever get divorced. And so you're staying put even when maybe you shouldn't. Or perhaps it's the flip side. Your parents were always fighting and it was just a horrible home environment and you wanted nothing more than peace and quiet and you wished that they would split. And so maybe you're jumping to that conclusion faster than you would if that hadn't been your experience. Now, I think we all know that divorce does impact kids. There's simply no denying that. But that doesn't mean that it has to be a completely traumatic experience. And if you can avoid these 6 things that I'm about to share with you, that will go a long way to helping your kids weather any divorce that happens to come their way. So one of the ways that I see kids hurt the most from their parents' divorce is anytime that they feel completely abandoned or discarded. And so that doesn't happen just because their parents split. That happens when one parent, or sometimes both parents, completely check out, turn away, sometimes even move away from them. As an adult who's been through divorce, I have some empathy for parents who end up doing this to their kids because divorce is so incredibly painful for the adults. And sometimes the way that we deal with pain is simply avoidance. And sadly, sometimes the kids then become part of that avoidance, especially if by looking at them, it makes you feel the pain and the regret and the shame and all of those things so acutely. But as adults, it's our job to do that work and to not abandon the kids. When kids are weaponized in order to get back at or control the other parent, it is extremely damaging for them. And so it's really important to be on the lookout for ways that you or your ex may inadvertently be doing this, especially some of those small ways where you're trying to use your kid in order to control the other person's behavior. Okay, this next one can be a hard one. And that's when one or both parents turns to the kids for their own emotional regulation. And again, I have empathy. Divorce is so hard. And as a single parent, you're often finding yourself without a lot of support, and the other humans that you're around are your children. But it's not their job to make you feel okay. And I know sometimes I hear people who have been divorced saying that the only thing that's getting them through their days is their kids, which it's awesome that your kids are your motivation. But at the same time, that's a whole lot of responsibility to put on those kids. And they start to feel then like they are the adults. They start to feel like they are the ones who need to take care of you. And that's a really hard place for a kid to be because, well, they're forced to grow up so fast. This next one is one that I think we all know. And that's how important it is not to badmouth the other parent. And the reason that this is so important is remember that your child is a product of that other person. And so if you are continually talking about all of the ways that their mom or their dad is fill in the blank, they're going to start to see that in themselves and internalize those traits in themselves. And be open to the fact that even though this person didn't make a good partner for you, that doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot be a good parent to your kid. But there's a flip side to that, one that I think is often overlooked. So let's say that your child comes to you and they have some observations about their other parent that are difficult, maybe painful. And there are things that you know happen to be true. Maybe they're recognizing some narcissistic traits in them or recognizing signs of substance abuse, whatever it is. So they come to you kind of for a reality check of like, I'm experiencing this. What is this? Is this valid? And if your response is one of only positive things about their other parent in an effort to refrain from bad-mouthing, what you're inadvertently doing is dismissing your kids' feelings and their observations. You're telling them that what you're seeing isn't real. And that can also be extremely damaging to them. So, what I recommend doing is, and it's a fine line, you don't want to overshare and you don't want to be the one initiating those conversations about difficult situations with the other parent. But if your kid is the one picking up on it and they're coming to you and they're starting to ask questions, then you're going to have to start to figure out how much they need to know and start to give them some information in an age appropriate way. And then finally, the last thing, and this is one I touched on earlier, kids need to have a sense of security. They need to have a feeling of what's coming next. And so anything that you can do to help calm their fears about what is going to be happening, whether on a daily basis, a weekly basis, looking years into the future, is going to go a long way to helping them weather this storm. So, regardless of your situation and the decisions that you ultimately make, I wish the best for you and your family.